Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Brett, and I'm an assistant professor at the College of Information at University of Arizona. So this poster was presented at the Association for Information Science and Technology in 2024 in Calgary, Canada. And I did just want to give a little overview of this ongoing study. So this study is a Templeton Foundation funded grant on this crazy concept of humility and inquiry. And it's a really interesting philosophical and psychological concept. But the basic idea is that you recognize that your beliefs or opinions might be fallible. And so you conduct lines of inquiry with a humble attitude or orientation. It's a very fraught concept. It's still very early and emerging, but very relevant to things like misinformation, disinformation, given that if you approach inquiry in an open-minded and humble way, then we can say that, there might be a reduction in incivility, there might be a reduction in misinformation, etc. So this study in particular is focused on developing a text-based measure of humility and inquiry. Right. So this is bringing together a lot of fields, as you can see: natural language processing, philosophy, social sciences, etc. And what we're doing here, and what we really want to focus on, and what the big takeaway for you is in this poster, is using computational grounded theory. What is that? So this is an interesting kind of combination of multiple methods, some classic methods in natural language processing and text classification, but also qualitative methods like grounded theory. So grounded theory is an ethnographically inspired area of work that focuses on content analysis and thematic analysis of text. Frequently text, but you can use other forms of media such as images, etc. So here, this is just an ongoing study we wanted to give you a little bit of background on. So firstly, what is humility and inquiry, and how do you measure it in text? So first, text-based measures of humble inquiry. So to begin, how do we define humility and inquiry? Well, let's just zoom right in and look at humility and inquiry, which can be defined as recognizing that one's beliefs and attitudes, opinions might be incorrect. And traditional studies of humility and inquiry, or HI, they're based on self-reports. Really interestingly, there's a lot of diary studies. There's a lot of folks who say, am I being humble here? Am I operating with open-mindedness when I do my lab experiment? Am I making sure that I do my diligence in checking all the literature for things that might contradict my hypotheses? So these self-reports, right, and diary studies lead to some very interesting outcomes, but they don't allow us to look systematically at larger scale occurrences of humility and inquiry, such as at the discipline level, or even at the research group level over time. So in this study, we develop a text-based measure so that we can analyze the scientific literature, such as peer-reviewed journals, and perhaps even other types of data, such as lab notebooks or open peer review reports. So, but here we are just looking at scientific literature, very straightforward, available to us, full text we're looking at right now across a couple of fields, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So are we clear on humility and inquiry? We'll get into a bit more, but the idea is we're taking scientific articles and we're analyzing them, or we want to analyze them to see how much humility is expressed in them. How do we do this? Well, we are a team of 7, but 6 are featured here, of a philosopher from Gonzaga University. We have computational social scientists and information scientists, and Yeaeun Kwon and Charlie Gomez, and sociologists, and also to some extent computational social scientists. We would say in Erin Leahey and Jina Lee, and myself, who is an information scientist. So here we take this computational grounded theory approach. And this approach is a kind of a relatively emerging method to developing theory. So grounded theory is one that aims to derive theory by analyzing text and other types of evidence. So this computational grounded theory combines quantitative techniques, computational, like topic modeling and other machine learning approaches with qualitative approaches. You can see Nelson 2020 for a very good overview of computational grounded theory. And the idea is that you use a combination of these quantitative and qualitative approaches together to do modeling of phenomena in larger scale settings. So classic examples are using topic models on, let's say, interviews, where traditionally you would just analyze those by qualitatively reading the text and then applying themes. Oh, I see the theme of anger. I see the theme of patriotism. And you yourself as a human would go through and label those. And then you would group those themes across many interviews to discover some of the themes that are present across all of your interviews, right? Well, you can do that computationally to some extent, right? You can look at things like discourse cues. Is there uncertainty in the grammatical structure of the sentence? Can you do the same thing? Can you look at topics? Are there latent topics that are embedded that you might not see as a human, but a computational model might like LDA might surface for you? So for us, what flavor of computational grounded theory are we applying? Well, we begin qualitatively. We begin with grounded theory, so to speak. We begin by annotating scientific articles using a qualitative content analysis approach based on dimensions of HI that we discovered in the literature. So some of these include, for example, limits of knowledge, admitting that you're wrong sometimes, right? Acknowledging other people's perspectives, being open-minded, engaging as if you were thinking from the perspective of your adversary, this kind of thing. And so we also identified computational models that might capture these concepts, such as dictionary-based approaches of uncertainty. So as maybe many of you know, there's well-established literature in identifying uncertainty, such as hedging, right? Hedging literature. Oh, we suggest that this may be the case, right? So there's these words we can pick out like may or might or perhaps that suggest uncertainty. And part of that could be an indicator of humility. So we can use these computational approaches in addition to our grounded theory inspired. It's not like strict grounded theory. Some people would say that, a lot of the grounded theory we take are inspired by the original kind of ethnographic approaches. But here we take this grounded theory approach to HI. And so given this dual approach, we combine these, but first to annotate our training data is this first step, right? So first we want to annotate our training data. What is our data? Right now, we are focusing on economics, psychology, and sociology articles. And these are taken a bit convenience sample-y for starters. We were looking at articles that we personally were reading to find in the wild examples of humility. But then we were also systematically looking for articles in databases, such as from across a variety of prestigious and less prestigious journals in economics, in psychology, and sociology. And our ultimate goal here is to use a corpus from the last 20 years or so as a first step. It might be interesting to go even farther back, right? Or just to look at 1 year. But for now, we're just going to take a sample of 10 to 20 years. And we're going to get the full text of that. So, but first, we manually annotated these articles because we don't have a model yet of humility. So first, this began in Zotero, where we were labeling specific instances just in terms of phrases, right? Like, it is not clear, a limited evidence base, this kind of thing. But then we evolved to think, okay, we need to do this at the sentence level. And from there, it was clear that some sentences might have multiple labels. And so our model right now includes multi-label prediction. So we moved on to creating a code book. So as you'll recall, we started with a bit of a deductive framework in the sense that we looked at the literature and said, okay, what are the constituent elements of humility in inquiry? And the literature told us that some things might include admitting that you're wrong, considering viewpoints of others, tempering your claims. And so from there, we added those to our codebook kind of as our deductive, beginning seed concepts. And then from there, we actually just started to discover that, by golly, there are more than shades and valences and subtleties to each of these concepts. So we built out a code book that we were seeing with things, kind of on a range of very strong examples of humility on one side, if you will, and we're still discussing whether this is a spectrum or something else, if that metaphor works for us. But thinking of like lots of humility, very very epistemically humble, to the other side, not very much humility, in fact, arrogance, epistemic arrogance, and shades of that too. So we actually built out from just positive humility to also including what we might call its negative pole, or kind of overconfidence in your claims as a kind of erosion of that humility and inquiry. So this codebook is ongoing, but right now we're getting a bit of saturation, as you might hear in some of the qualitative literature. And so we have this shared codebook where we came to actually 6-person consensus, which I know sounds pretty crazy. We still need to calculate the inter-annotator agreement, but for now, we're just identifying the sentences which we all come to an agreement on. And again, this is multi-label. So what does our codebook look like? So for the space of this poster, we only included a couple, but here are some codes that indicate humility. So T, tempering utterances. This is when you kind of draw back the strength of your claim. So for example, indeed, what I have said so far suggests that any attempt to understand nasty claims by specifying some context-independent content is misguided. Okay, so they are suggesting. Now, this is an interesting example because we hear some strong language at the end here that might suggest a little more confidence, a little more maybe epistemic commitment to this outcome, but they tempered it, right? They said suggests. So these kinds of utterances we're trying to capture with the label T for tempering. And we did this again with the manual annotation, but then also we're going to use hedging models to identify sentences that include hedging. And we want to make sure they're robust. This is a little tangent, but we want to make sure that they're robust to statistical and probabilistic speak. So probabilistic speak sounds a lot like tempering. Sometimes it sounds a lot like hedging, like the probability of women being in this profession are highly likely, or maybe unlikely. So because of this, we think this is kind of a red herring for our model. So we're coding those as well, just to tell the model they might look like tempering and hedging, but they're not. They're actually statistical talk. So okay, tangent over. The next code that we have is fallibility expressions. This is a very core aspect of the deductive framework. So we wanted to include this in the literature. Fallibility expressions are very central. So it says we cannot exclude the possibility that a certain number of papers not analyzed in the present study include acknowledgements without specifically mentioning funding source. So here they're saying, you know what? We don't know everything. It's possible that our analysis was not entirely comprehensive. There's a possibility that some of the papers include acknowledgements without mentioning the funding source. So we could be wrong, right? So that's what fallibility means, is that admitting that you're wrong, admitting that you're fallible. And then another important constituent of humility and inquiry is alternative views or explanations. So this is a really interesting one because, oh goodness, it seems pretty straightforward, right? Like you're saying, well, here's my view, but here's a view that disagrees with me. That seems like a way to conduct humble inquiry. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But it gets kind of interesting and very subtle because here's an example of a pretty straightforward one. However, other studies find contradictory results of gender parity, right? So, okay, they found other contradictory results. That sounds like an alternative view. But an interesting thing is if you acknowledge that another methodological approach could have been appropriate and maybe could have surfaced some other aspect of the phenomenon under study. Phenomenon. Yeah. Okay. Under study. So this kind of emerged after a little bit of discussion that, for example, you can say, that said, it is also possible that these intermediate redness values are the results of the dynamics of arousal level during these situations, especially in the case of dust bathing. So this study was about hens and blushing, what makes hens blush. So they want to explain their results. They have one hypothesis. The hens blush when they're around roosters because of, the romance of that. But they're saying, oh, maybe our hypothesis is not the case. Maybe it's also possible that this blushing are the results of dynamics of arousal level, such as during dust bathing. So they're just, they're really active when they're dust bathing. So this is not a great example of the methodological thing that I just mentioned. An example of the methodological thing would be we are studying mental health and we use surveys. But we could have used diary studies. We could have used think alouds. We could have used dream analysis, right? So mentioning these other ways to get at the phenomena are kind of like an alternative view, so to speak, because they might surface different aspects of the thing under study. Okay, finally, incomplete work. New forms of data must therefore be gathered to test and track the existence of political misogyny. This is acknowledging that their work is not complete, that there's more to be done, that their work is not the end all be all, that they didn't cover everything that they could have possibly covered in the study. Okay, so let's move on to non-humility. Remember that spectrum I was talking about? So in this, we're thinking about arrogance. We're not really sure what to call this yet, but non-humility is kind of the phenomena on the other side of the pole. So one code that we have is called claim. And in this, we also used our qualitative approach, but there are computational measures that we're going to apply to our corpus once we scale up, such that we can identify novelty claims, right? So right now, for example, we coded this sentence. Our argument and analysis provides two key contributions to existing scholarship. Oh, two key contributions, huh? Well, that is a claim about their contribution to the literature. This isn't arrogance per se, right? But it's claiming that they are what they produced was valuable and isn't quite humility. So this is something that kind of puffing yourself up that we're coding on the negative pole of humility. And we can apply a computational model that's out there. I believe Uzi et al. Has a corpus of promotional language. Also, Jina Lee and Erin Leahey, the co-authors of this work, of this poster, have developed ways of capturing novelty claims as well in scientific text. Okay, and finally, for this negative pole, we have T minus, and T minus draws from the work of De Jesus, which I can definitely share. But the idea is that you're making a very strong claim, a generic claim about the world. And it holds not only for your sample, but it's widely generalizable for all time and for all places. So there's no tempering. They are saying that this study proves that what we found is true always and everywhere, which we think is kind of the opposite of, of couching your claims in words like suggests or may or might. And so this is a type of epistemic certainty that even borders on a bit of arrogance, right? So for example, you can say, in general, our findings reveal a significant effect of parents on their children's work values. So here you can see it's very generic. It's in the present tense, which indicates that this is the case always, so to speak. A significant effect of parents on their children's work values. Which parents? Which children? they don't refer back to their sample. They use language that's much more generic to apply more universally. So here, when we see no tempering and generic claims, we do code it as T minus. Okay, drum roll. This is our final piece. So right now we're working on tuning our our classification model. Now, right now, we couldn't decide on one label for some of the sentences, so we have a multi-label classification. So we're using our annotated corpus of training data. And right now that includes qualitatively, manually, and annotated data. But the next step is going to include these computational models that I mentioned for novelty, for hedging claims, and potentially a dictionary of other words that might get at things like incompleteness of work. I'll stop there. Okay. So we use the training data to train a multi-label and a single label classifier. We're still trying to figure out which is going to be the stronger predictive model. And then we draw from Hugging Face pre-trained transformer libraries. We've experimented with BERT, Spectre, and Aspire. But we found actually, well, we also looked at SciBERT and some others that are specifically trained on scientific text, but we found that they didn't perform as well as some of these more general purpose classifiers. So we're kind of tuning the classifier, and the results actually are pretty promising for the F1 and ACC so far. So as you can see, our highest our strongest model right now is BERT with a 5 multi-class. So we can go into the details of how we're arranging these classes, but here we have our F1 of 85 and the ACC of 85. So we're getting pretty decent results with these, but we really do need to expand. Oh, and I should also mention, so we have 50 examples in each of our codes. So for example, the A code has 50, the C code has 50, the T code has 50. One thing that we're struggling a bit with is how to treat nuns. So do we want a larger amount of nuns in our corpus? Because the nuns tend to have a higher variability, right? Where you might see for the A's and the hedging, they pretty much have a distribution, a variability that you start to see some repeats, et cetera. But with the nuns, what is that? So, we're trying different models that include nuns, that don't include nuns. And that has actually been a really important detail of when we're training these models. So if you have any suggestions on how to treat nuns, please do reach out or comment in the doobly-doo, as they say. But with that, that's kind of where we are at the moment. Our next steps are to get feedback in a conference in February 2025 on our current findings, and to do a little bit of validation with an expert panel of philosophers and with social scientists to verify that some of these concepts are really capturing what the philosophers and psychologists mean by humiliated inquiry. So with that, thank you so much for listening.